The chamber was silent before the storm, cameras blinking like watchful eyes as senators shuffled papers and cleared throats, yet every person in the room felt it. Something was about to detonate. Senator Kennedy sat still, hands folded, his gaze fixed on the polished desk before him, as if preparing himself not for a debate, but for a trial of principle. Across from him, Senator Schumer paced quietly, his expression unreadable, though tension coiled beneath the surface like a drawn bowstring. Whispers swept the gallery seats where citizens, reporters, and aides gathered, anticipation prickling like electricity in the air. The issue on the floor was not small, not technical, not procedural. It was about the direction of the country, about promises made and trust broken. Kennedy's thoughts flickered back to the small towns he visited, to the tired faces of factory workers and parents juggling bills, to the hope trembling behind every handshake. He knew why he was here. He knew why he could not back down. And when the gavel struck, the fire began. Schumer spoke first, his voice crisp, measured, shaped by years of knowing how to command a room with authority alone. He spoke of policy frameworks, of projected outcomes, of the careful balancing act of governance that required patience and compromise, his words moving like chess pieces across a strategic board. But the more he spoke, the more it felt distant from the quiet, real-world struggles everyone claimed to fight for, and the gallery shifted uneasily. Kennedy listened, saying nothing, but the storm inside him brewed stronger, with every elegant justification that seemed to forget the very people whose stories burned in his mind. For Schumer, numbers and legislation formed the battlefield. For Kennedy, the battlefield was the kitchen table of every family in America. When Schumer finished, the chamber held its breath, but Kennedy's silence was the loudest thing in the room. When Kennedy finally rose, his voice came low at first, almost gentle, as though he were telling a personal memory rather than entering a political clash. He spoke of the families he met last autumn, of the woman in Louisiana who worked 3 jobs yet still couldn't afford her medications, of the father who had to choose between heating his home and filling the fridge. His words began to swell, each sentence building with an emotional force that made some in the gallery lean forward without meaning to. He spoke not to outshine, not to win, but to remind. In his voice was the unmistakable ache of someone who had seen suffering firsthand and refused to let it be drowned out by polished rhetoric. And while Schumer had the room's respect, Kennedy now had its heart. Schumer tried to counter, but the tone had shifted. Facts and figures alone no longer stood steady under the weight of lived experience. He raised concerns about feasibility, about compromise, about the dangers of idealism. But Kennedy met each point not with dismissal, but with stories, with humanity, with the faces and names of those whose lives hung in the balance. The debate no longer felt like a clash of egos, but a struggle between 2 visions of what leadership meant, one rooted in caution and structure, the other rooted in passion and conviction. The chamber was no longer silent but alive, pulsing with the energy of ideas colliding like lightning against steel. People were no longer simply listening, they were feeling, yet Kennedy was not unkind. After every sharp exchange, he steadied his tone, as if reminding himself that true service meant compassion even in opposition. He acknowledged Schumer's experience, his years of dedication, his genuine desire to serve. And that acknowledgement landed differently, because it was not mockery, not condescension, but respect. It made his next words hit harder because they came from someone who believed that fighting for the people did not require fighting against humanity. The gallery watched as the clash became conversation, though still fiery, still fierce, yet undeniably human. Schumer stood in a stillness that seemed to stretch across the room. He was not defeated. He was reflective. Something in Kennedy's words had pierced deeper than rhetoric, a reminder of why he had chosen public service in the first place, before power, before strategy, before pressure. The room felt it, a quiet shift of gravity from confrontation to contemplation. This moment was not about victory, it was about rediscovery. And that perhaps was the true destruction, not of a man, but of the political armor he had worn for so long. He almost forgot the heart beneath it. As the debate continued, Kennedy's voice grew steadier, stronger, not loud but certain. He spoke of unity, of rebuilding trust, of remembering that the government's power meant nothing if the people it served could no longer believe in it. His words moved with the rhythm of hope, first whispered, and then spoken aloud with courage. The gallery began to nod, some with tears they did not expect. The cameras, once predatory, were now simply witnesses to something rare, politics with soul. Schumer exhaled deeply before responding again, and this time his tone had changed. Gone were the layered defenses. He spoke now not as a leader addressing a chamber, but as a man remembering his own beginning, his own fire. He acknowledged the pain Kennedy described and admitted that somewhere along the way, the fight had become more about navigating storms than calming them. The honesty rippled across the room like a bell. Kennedy listened, and something softened in his gaze. There, in the fiery clash, a bridge was being rebuilt. The final moments were not triumphant or theatrical. They were quiet, two men standing not as adversaries, but as servants of a shared country struggling to remember itself. The gavel sounded, but no one moved immediately. The debate was over, but something else had begun. Reporters would later twist the exchange into battles of dominance and defeat, but anyone who truly watched understood what they had witnessed. It was not destruction, it was transformation. Something had changed in the chamber that day, in the hearts of those watching, and perhaps in the hearts of the men themselves. When Kennedy left the chamber, he did not celebrate. He simply breathed, with the humble, weary hope of someone who fought not to win, but to make a difference. And that became the legacy of that fiery day. Not the clash, not the spectacle, but the reminder that leadership is not measured in volume or victory, but in the courage to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And that message echoed far beyond the marble halls, into kitchens and small towns and quiet roads across the country, where hope was needed most.